So in the last module, and by the way, even if you're using the to call close script method, that was a handful, still watch back over the last module because this module builds on top of that. Okay, so everything I say here won't necessarily make sense unless you look back at the last module. But in that last module, I showed you how to execute clinically, right? Is that everything in there really needed to be dialed in. Whereas in the to call close method, you have a little bit more wiggle room and a little bit more room to, just really, there's just less rigidity in it, right? So on that note, as I said, make sure you watch the last module so this module makes sense, because I won't be going into as much details about the specific things that we're saying, right? Because I already went ahead and did that last module. On that note, let's get into the to call close method. So let's get into the to call close script. So real quick, let me just give you an overview of the to call close script. Now, very similar to the one call close script, this module is meant to be tweaked, refined, for you to add your own flair, your own voice to things. And the actual framework of the to call close is actually very similar to the one call close. It's just sort of rearranged in a different format. So in call one, we're actually going to go through phase one, the digging phase. And that's actually all we're going to do, right? We're just going to do a bit of digging and we're going to see whether it's worth having a longer format conversation. And if it is, and you kind of run through this presentation, you ask some questions, you explain to him why. You go, hey, based on this and this and this, I think it's worth having a longer conversation. And then you open up Calendly and book it in. Now, when we get onto the second call after that first call that we had, we actually go straight into phase two, the emotional buy-in, right? We actually kind of catch them off guard slightly here. And then obviously we've already gone through phase one digging phase, but we kind of reinstate what was said in, what they said. We relay it back to them, phase one, right? That digging phase. So it actually goes phase two, phase one, and then it goes into phase three, which is the logic phase, then phase four, the culture fit phase, and then lastly, phase five, the close. Now, as I mentioned in the last module, and I kind of gave you a little bit of nuance and a little bit more detail as to what to actually say, so you just assume familiarity right from the get-go with clients and with prospects when you're speaking to them. Obviously, before we get into this, you want to have a little bit of small chat, just get to know each other, et cetera, and then you can get into things. So let's get into what you say in that first call, because as I said, there's only one phase. First, you say something along the lines of, let me give you a little bit of clarity on how my 15-minute demo calls go. First, I'm going to tell you a little bit about how my agency operates, who we've worked with, and really what matters to us. And then I'll ask you some questions so I can understand the nuances of your business. Then we'll see whether it's worth penciling in a longer format call. Now, ladies and gentlemen, whatever your angle to the meeting is here, obviously replace it for the demo call and tweak, right? So for example, if your angle, and we've talked about this, right? There's just between an offer and an angle. So if your angle to the meeting is a free ad audit, then you'll tweak this initial meeting script to accommodate. So obviously, and you'll see through the vault, we do a 15-minute demo where we kind of show them how our agency operates, what's important to us in agency, and then we'll ask them some digging questions, and then Danny will book in a call with me. In your case, if your angle is a 15-minute ad audit or a this or that, then obviously, scrap this first bit, then obviously scrap the script in the first call. You're still going to follow the script in that second call, but after, your angle that you've taken for this first call, you're going to have to actually kind of, deliver on it. So next, let me tell you a little bit about how we operate in my agency and what's important to our ethos. And that's really important when using the demo call format, that you actually lead in with this, right? Because just remember, they don't know you that well, right? You haven't really built rapport yet. So it's best if you start the conversation with this demo call. And also bear in mind, like a demo call is like, as the name suggests, to demo, like you are demoing what your agency is about, what you've been able to accomplish in the past for other clients. If you have case studies, if you don't worry, just skim over that. And it said, really just focus on like your ethos and what's important to you, et cetera, et cetera. It said, really the one call close and the two call close they have the same bare bones. It's just how we're assembling them and how we're, they have the same core components, right? It's just the way that we're putting those Lego pieces together is slightly different. Next, you're going to say something along the lines of, Sophia, you took the time out of your busy schedule today to have this meeting with me. Why is that? As I said, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, I won't get into, again, the psychology of why we say this stuff. Make sure you watch module 1 for that. As I said, same, Lego building blocks here. It's just the way that we're assembling them is slightly different between the one call close and the two call close. Then you're going to ask them something along the lines of what inspired you to start your business. Moving on, what sort of customer/client do you serve and at what price point? Moving on, awesome. Now I'm going to ask you some more specific questions so I can understand where your business is at and where you want to get to in, let's say, 12 months' time. Does that sound fine with you, Sophia? Moving on, as I said, all of the actual psychology behind why we say this stuff is covered in the last module. All right, so what's the current process of taking a stranger and turning them into customer? Really, what's your marketing or sales process at the moment? Next, you're going to ask them, how much revenue is the business doing per month? Self-explanatory. Then you're going to move on to how much revenue would you like to be making in 12 months? As I mentioned in the last module, it can be 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. Hey, you can even throw a curveball in and say, how much revenue would you like to be making in 7 months, in 15 months, right? Do whatever you want here, really. Then you're going to ask, have you ever done paid advertising before? Obviously, as I mentioned already, if you're doing email marketing, you're going to slot that in instead. If you do or some organic content creation, you're going to slot that in. If you do, you might even have an agency that does SEO or does YouTube organic growth for people and helps people with their YouTube SEO, whatever it may be, right? You're going to slot that in there. Have you ever worked with an agency before? Once again, this will tell you a lot about them as mentioned in the last module. And then here, moving on, this is really the only bit that's kind of different from the digging phase of the last module. Well, after our brief discussion today, I have a high level of certainty we can get you results. And I think it's definitely at least worth penciling in a longer 45-minute discussion. What's your thoughts about that? And obviously here, they'll tell you, okay, yeah, actually, after you told me a little bit about your agency and after our discussion today, I agree. I think it's worth having a longer 45-minute discussion. Or maybe they'll ask you some logistical questions of like, oh, before we have the call, before we have a longer format conversation, how does your agency work with this? Or, if we work with you, do we have to do this? Or do you guys do, you might have some logistical questions there and you'll have to answer them. But if all goes well, then you tell them, you go, all right, awesome. Let me open up my Calendly and let's book you in for another time. As I said, very important to use Calendly there. Now we get into call number 2. As I said, with the second call, we're actually throwing a curveball at the beginning by actually moving straight into the emotional buy-in phase and then reaffirming what was said in phase 1 in that first call. Now, before we get into this call, as I said, this is slightly different, the phrasing from the way it worked in the last module or, the last one call close methodology. So you're going to say something along the lines of, now, before we get into this call and talk about scaling your business, I always think it's important to attach meaning behind action. And the reason I think it's important is because, look, I'm here to serve you as a service provider. And I want to know, what makes you tick? What makes your team tick? What makes your company what it is? And in order to understand that, I really just want to know a little bit more about where your head is at as a business owner, because you're quite clearly very successful. So why do you even want to go from where you're at to where you want to get to? And by the way, don't tell me because I want to make more money or this or that. But why? I'm just very curious. Once again, as I mentioned in the last module, you're just going to go ahead and do a lot of digging here, right? Keep digging, keep getting down to the root answer and really the root cause. So the next thing you're going to do is you are going to move back to phase 1 and you're actually going to reiterate what was said in that first call. So let me just summarize what we talked about in the last call. And here you're basically just going to restate from roughly around question 3 to question 11 of your first call together. You should have been taking notes, or even if you're just taking mental notes, here's really where you restate why they started their business, how much revenue they're doing, where they want to get to, etc., etc. And also this is super important because this really shows them that you are attentive, you listened, you cared. And as I said, that's why I really like to have pen, paper, and write stuff down. Then you are going to move into phase 3, logic phase. So as we already established, you're trying to get from, and once again, hypothetical numbers, we'll say 50,000 a month to 100,000 a month. You're trying to get from 50,000 to 100,000 a month. Would you agree that marketing and getting more leads to your business is honestly, realistically, the only way that you're going to make that happen? Great. Well, Sophia, let me just lay out some of your options, right? You could do SEO, and that's fine. That's cool, right? And you won't have any sort of feedback for 9 months. And I know at some point, maybe it will start working. And, that might be a slight little drizzle of new clients, but it won't be this torrential rainfall of just more customers than you know what to do with. And then, of course, there's things like, flyers or TV ads. And I'm sure some of your competitors are wasting their money on that. But nothing's going to give you the sort of ROI that Facebook ads are. Because at the end of the month, you're going to know exactly how much was spent, how many leads are brought in. And ultimately, we're going to have a very strong sign using those numbers of how much money was made from it. Would you agree that's, really the better option? So ladies and gentlemen, even as I did in that one call close module, I'm going off of my own script just to show you that whatever feels most natural to you, all you need to know really is just a framework. And then in the moment, whatever feels most natural to you, just roll with that. So real quick, let me explain what we do for our clients. And by the way, as I said, ladies and gentlemen, as I mentioned in the last module, this is where you explain what, what the service is, right? What the service is, what you do for your clients. If you have any results in the past, obviously talk about those, et cetera, et cetera. Now, after everything you told me, let me explain what the worst case scenario would look like. And as I said, ladies and gentlemen, this is where, by the way, if their worst case scenario is like horrendous, like you get no result, then like this script and stuff only works if you are coming from a place of integrity. And also, I don't want people who have, like, I don't want, if you're a beginner, right? I don't want this to scare you or anything like that. Like you'll know. And because the service delivery phase in this program is just so insane, it's so intense, you're gonna have absolutely no issues when it comes to service delivery. So really just use your intuition. Your intuition most of the time never really lies to you. Now that we've covered what the worst case scenario looks like, let me show you what a good scenario looks like. And here's actually what we accomplished for one of our clients, or you can say, a few of our clients, and then you can even pull up a case study or like a pitch deck or this or that, something visual, and then share your screen. This is all stuff that I mentioned in the last module. And then you're gonna move on to phase 4, culture fit. Now let's change tune real quick, because on the results front, like for me, it's a green light. And I mean, if you need me to explain a little bit more as to why I believe that, then we can get into it. But from everything you've shown me and for all the reasons I said, and you can even state the reasons, when that happens, I know we're going to knock it out the park. So now let's talk about culture fit. And here, ladies and gentlemen, remember you already would have discussed a little bit about the way your agency works in that first call, right? So you just kind of restate it here. You go, look, I already touched on this on our first call, but let me just restate the way that we work as an agency and really what's important to me and my team. And then you just go ahead and list off a few of those things. Now, Sophia, my question to you is, from everything that I've just showed you, why do you think that you would be a good fit for the way that we work at our agency and really our agency ethos? And then you are going to move on to phase 5, the close. And obviously there should be some positive stuff, or maybe they may go, actually, I don't think for this reason. And by the way, if a client tells you, hey, I don't think we're going to be a good culture fit, that's fine. Just move on. Like, because if fundamentally they don't think they're going to, whether results are good or not, if they don't think they're going to enjoy spending time with you and like working with you and your team, it doesn't matter. Like at that point, really nothing else matters, right? If they've gone to this stage of the process, 98% of the time, they're going to be like, oh, I think we'd be a good fit because of this and this and this and this, et cetera, et cetera. So from there, you're going to go, that's great to hear. And I agree we'd be a good culture fit too. So would you like our help scaling to $100,000 a month? And once again, here at this stage of the journey, especially if the culture fit thing has been positive, or culture fit sort of piece of the equation has been positive, then they're going to go, yeah, well, we'd love your help. And then you move on by saying, great, well, here's how our pricing works. And then you just go ahead and state the price. As I said, this is where you take all the knowledge you receive from the pricing modules and you decide on how much to charge them. And this is why I'm so infatuated with pen and paper, because I can kind of get a lot of my ideas down onto pen and paper without looking rude or without looking like I'm not a part of the conversation. And as I said, I can just start to really kind of get a little bit more clarity in my mind about how would we get results? What would, like, even just to myself, I'm thinking, okay, worst case, realistic, and best case scenario. And then I'm figuring out those numbers, especially for, myself, who does a lot of performance deals at the agency. Now, at this point, either client is going to say, great, or let's start. In which case, obviously, you can just skip this, or they may have some logistical questions or some objection questions. And obviously, we've already gone through this or actually, it should be coming up in one of the next few modules. And then basically, you follow all the same instructions that I gave you guys in the last module, in the one call close module. I'm not going to go ahead and say it again. As I said, just watch that and you already know what to, the way to conduct yourself once you get to this stage of the sales process. And then finally, you onboard and end. Ladies and gentlemen, action step for today is similar to the previous module step. I want you to physically block out 2 to 3 hours tomorrow in your calendar so you can go through, tweak this script, make it yours, and study it. I know this module was a lot of sort of repeating the script and this and that. But once again, I just wanted you to understand kind of the framework. Remember, the building blocks are exactly the same. We really don't change anything. It's just the order in which we build it is slightly different. And for 80% of people watching this, the 2-call close method is the best, as I said, but make sure you watch the last module because I actually go into why I say this stuff, et cetera, et cetera. As I said, for 80% of people, the 2-call close method works best. You would have already watched the module, 1-call close versus 2-call close framework, and you should understand why a certain framework works better for you and your stage of the journey or your pricing model. And with all that said, I just wanted to give you a little bit of context as to the way we kind of piece all this stuff together. On that note, I hope you guys have enjoyed. I'll catch you in the next one.